I've never told anyone about this before. For 63 years, I've kept it locked up inside, convinced it was too strange, too unbelievable, and, if I'm being honest, too terrifying. But now at 75, I'm not sure I have much left to hold on to, so I'll tell you. And maybe, just maybe, it'll be the last thing I do before I go. For years, I've comforted myself by saying I'm in my early 70s. But time is unforgiving, and today I turned 75. I never thought I'd make it this far, and to be honest, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to feel. I've spent most of my life wondering what the point was. My wife died 8 months ago, and the empty side of my bed feels more permanent with each passing day. My children live so far away, and I've never really felt the same connection with them as I did when they were younger. All that's left now is the slow, painful march of time, and this story, a story I never told anyone before. I'm telling it now because, at this point, there's nothing left to hide. Back in 1950, I was a 9-year-old boy living in a small town in Maine. It was the worst summer I'd ever had. My only friend moved away, and with my father not around, it felt like nothing but a never-ending stretch of days filled with loneliness. My mother was, well, she was a nag. I won't sugarcoat it. I spent most of my time avoiding her, and one of my favorite places to go was the local library. It wasn't much. A small, dusty building with more books than I could count, but still a place of solitude. For a kid like me, it was perfect. The library's collection wasn't impressive, but it was quiet, and I could get lost in the books without anyone bothering me. But there was one place I never explored. Not at first. There was a basement. Not the kind of basement you imagine, dark and cold. No, this one was behind a small wooden door in a far corner of the library. A door I never paid much attention to until one day I found myself staring at it. Something told me I shouldn't open it, but the pull of curiosity was too strong. I turned the old brass knob and I slipped inside. It was dark, really dark, and I had no idea where I was. The air was musty, and I fumbled around trying to find anything to hold on to. That's when I felt it, a string hanging above me. Without thinking, I grabbed it. The light bulb flickered on, casting a dim glow that barely lit the room. In front of me was a creaky staircase made of wood that seemed to groan under its own weight. I didn't know what I was doing. Every instinct told me to turn back, but I didn't. I went down, one step at a time. The stairs seemed to stretch on forever, and by the time I reached the bottom, the light from the bulb above was nothing more than a distant memory. In the darkness ahead of me, I saw a door. It was a massive red door, glowing faintly with a light that seemed to come from within. Without hesitation, I walked toward it. When I opened it, I was greeted by something I never expected. It was a library, the most beautiful library I'd ever seen. The smell, it was perfect, like citrus and pine, a mixture I can still remember so vividly. It's almost like I can smell it right now. The shelves were filled with books, the armchairs sat perfectly in the middle of the room, and the whole place seemed designed for me. I spent years returning to that basement library. It was my escape from a world that felt too harsh for a kid like me. I never told anyone about it, not even my mother. It was mine, my secret. The smell of citrus and pine, the warmth of the chairs, the feeling of being completely alone yet surrounded by a world of stories. Nothing could have been better. But then, on my 12th birthday, something changed. The smell. It wasn't the same anymore. That perfect scent turned sour. I couldn't understand it at first, but as I walked around the room, I realized something else was wrong. One of the books caught my eye. It was a maroon-colored, leather-bound book with a black footprint on the spine. I couldn't resist. I opened it. Inside, there was only one sentence. "Rest your sorrows down, friend, and leave them where they lie." I thought it was a joke, something someone left behind. But then I turned another page, and my name was written there, in dark red ink. I froze. My heart raced. I didn't understand what it meant. Why was my name there? What had happened? That's when I saw him, the man who had been sitting in the other chair, the one I had never touched. He looked at me with piercing gray eyes, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He told me things. things I didn't want to hear. He said my mother was dead. He said she had taken her own life in our kitchen. He offered me an escape, a way out of the hardships I was destined to face. At that moment, I ran. I couldn't stand to listen to him anymore, to hear his words that felt too real. But when I got home, I found the truth. The old man had been right. My mother was dead. She had killed herself. And from that day forward, that smell, the smell of citrus and pine, haunted me. Every time something tragic happened in my life, the smell would return. When my father came back into my life, when my wife miscarried, when my son's reckless driving took a life, every time the smell was there. It was a warning, a sign that something awful was coming. Now, after all these years, I pass the library every day. The door's back, the same one that I found all those years ago. I haven't opened it yet, but I know I will. I know where to find him. As a history teacher for middle schoolers, one of the least exciting parts of my year is the dreaded living history assignment. Every spring, the students are tasked with interviewing their grandparents or elderly relatives, asking them about their memories of the past. The assignment's purpose is noble, but it's tedious. Most kids give the same tired answers, stories of childhoods filled with hardship, poverty, and old-fashioned values. But this year, things were different. Olivia, one of my students, was quiet, plump, and unremarkable in every way. A B student, not a troublemaker, just one of those kids who blended in with the rest. I didn't expect much from her project, just another boring interview, another recitation of distant memories. But when I started reviewing her submission, I was quickly disturbed. Olivia handed me 2 discs, and I started with the one marked interview. The video that popped up wasn't the usual low-quality footage of a grandparent recounting their youth. This was something else. The video began with a shaky camera shot of what appeared to be a messy hoarder's living room. Olivia sat curled in a chair, clutching a notebook, looking uneasy. Across from her sat an old man, his face expressionless, staring at her as if waiting for her to speak. "Go ahead," a woman's voice whispered from behind the camera. "I'm here with my great-uncle Stephen," Olivia's small voice said. "He's going to tell us about his oldest memories from being in the army." The man, Great-Uncle Stephen, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He was hunched in his chair, silent for a moment before finally speaking. "Nope," he muttered, his voice raspy. "Glad to get out of my town, though." "Where did you go?" Olivia asked. "Balkans." The interview followed the usual script. Boring questions, curt responses. But when Olivia asked him, "What is your very worst memory from the army?" the room seemed to shift. Great-Uncle Stephen got quiet, his eyes narrowing as if lost in thought. "I was a kid when I enlisted," he finally said. "Your brother's age." He paused. "I never saw combat. Both my deployments were to cities in Eastern Europe. Civil war. Everything was a mess. I felt like a janitor." The conversation grew more intense when he mentioned a school his unit had been assigned to clean up, one destroyed by violence and years of neglect. "I saw kids walking by it every day, begging for money. But the school just stayed there, abandoned," he said. His words, though disturbing, didn't fully prepare me for what came next. Great-Uncle Stephen paused, lifting a piece of paper. His voice wavered as he read from it. "Dear Sir, I never loved my country. These wars are born from pointless patriotism, but I don't care what name my home has. I care only for my family, my wife, and child." He read the letter slowly, describing a man's deep despair as he helplessly watched his wife and child die from illness. The man had no choice but to continue working as a janitor in a school that was falling apart. There was a sadness in his words, a hopelessness that made my skin crawl. But it wasn't until he mentioned finding something in the basement that things got really strange. "I found a letter," Great-Uncle Stephen continued. "A letter from a man named Stanislav who had worked at the school. He'd written about his pain, his life falling apart. But what I found in that basement was more than a letter." The scene cut, and the video showed Great-Uncle Stephen holding up a faded photograph of the ruined school. But it wasn't just the school. It was the bodies, still there, hanging from the rafters, lifelike yet unnervingly still. The man, Stanislav, had been in the basement, working, cleaning, and living among the dead, unaware, or perhaps too lost in his own mind to care, about the bodies around him. The smell of decay had filled that room, and it wasn't just the bodies. It was the radio that had kept him company, its crackling voice serving as his only comfort. He could have been cleaning over bodies for months, Great Uncle Stephen said, his voice low. And he didn't even know. The radio was all he heard. The more I watched, the more I realized how much Olivia's great uncle had been affected by the horrors he'd seen. But then came something else, something that truly chilled me. Olivia's voice returned, but this time it wasn't in the same tone. She was crying as she said, "Miss Garrity, I'm sorry about my mom, but she refused to record the rest of what my uncle was saying. But I asked him to continue and secretly recorded it on my phone." Great Uncle Stephen's voice returned, slow and deliberate. "The letter had a date on it," he said. 2 weeks before we started rebuilding the school. The school had been destroyed 2 years ago, but the man's letter was dated after the destruction. I knew something wasn't right. I had to find out more. He had gone into the basement, searching for answers, and found something far worse than he could have imagined. The bodies in that basement, the old janitor who hadn't known the war had ended, they were still there, preserved in some twisted form. The most disturbing part of the video wasn't the story itself, but the quiet realization of what had been happening in that school long after the war had ended. It was a haunting image. People still living in a place that had become a graveyard, unaware of what had truly happened. I was shaken by this project, but what was most unnerving was how Olivia handled it. She was clearly disturbed, but her fascination with her uncle's story was profound. She wasn't just learning history, she was living it, in a way that no one else ever had to. By the time I finished watching, I felt like I'd been taken on a journey, one that left me with more questions than answers. What happened in that school? What had the janitor truly seen? And what had Olivia uncovered about her uncle's past? The project left me unsettled, and it's one I'll never forget. It wasn't just history, it was a glimpse into the darkest corners of the human experience. And that, for me, made it one of the most disturbing and unforgettable assignments I've ever graded. You know the kind of person I'm talking about. The neighbor who's always trying to make a name for himself on YouTube, always doing stunts, always filming himself, as if the world is dying to see what ridiculous thing he'll do next. At first, it was kind of amusing. You'd get to watch him choke on cinnamon or lie on the hood of his car as it slowly crept down the driveway. He'd scream things like "epic win" or "epic fail." And honestly, it was a bit of a joke to me. I figured he was just looking for attention, the kind of attention that would make him feel important. But as time went on, it all got a bit tiring. I didn't care to watch him make a fool of himself anymore. Then one day he knocked on my door. He was heading out of town for a few weeks and asked if I could collect his mail for him. I'd never been a big fan of the guy, but I agreed. I figured it would be nice to have a break from his antics. At least this way, I wouldn't have to hear about his latest stunt or see him trying to go viral for something ridiculous. The first couple of days, everything seemed normal. He got a few bills, some junk mail, and what I assumed was a birthday card. Nothing out of the ordinary. I didn't think much of it. But then a few days later, I came home to find a large cardboard box sitting on his porch. In big red letters, it was marked with a "Return to Sender" label. I'll admit I didn't think much of it at first, but as I approached the box, I realized how heavy it was. It was so heavy, in fact, that I struggled to lift it. It was odd. The box seemed far too large and bulky to just contain a simple return. I thought it must have been one of those meat-of-the-month subscription services, but even then, it seemed too big and too heavy. I wasn't sure what to do with it, so I decided to drag it into my garage, figuring it would be easier to store there until my neighbor returned. But when I tried to open the garage door, it got stuck, like it always did. It was an old door, and it always took a bit of force to get it to move. As I struggled with it, the box slipped from my grip and hit the ground with a light crack. I cursed under my breath, hoping I hadn't broken anything inside. I finally got the door open and dragged the box into the garage, setting it down in the corner. I thought nothing more of it, leaving the box there until my neighbor would return. But over the next few days, something strange started happening. A smell. At first, I thought it was just a dead skunk or some kind of animal outside. The smell was a sickly, sweet, rotting odor, but it didn't fade like I expected. Instead, it grew stronger. I figured the smell had come from something in the box, but I didn't want to deal with it. Not yet. It wasn't until the smell began creeping under the door into my house that I knew I had to take action. I opened the garage door, and the stench hit me like a brick wall. It was overpowering, worse than anything I had ever smelled. It was foul, like something had died in there. I had no idea what was inside, but I wasn't eager to find out. I grabbed a pair of scissors, thinking I could just cut open the box and dump whatever was inside into a trash bag. I hoped it was something simple, something I could just get rid of without too much trouble. But when I opened the box, everything changed. The smell was unbearable. Worse than before, it was like a combination of rotting flesh, decay, and something else. Something I couldn't quite place. I staggered back, fighting the urge to vomit. The stench was so strong that I couldn't even bear to touch the box. I ran out of the garage, gasping for fresh air. For days, the smell clung to my clothes, my skin, everything. It was as though it had seeped into my very being. I couldn't shake it. Every time I walked into the garage, it hit me again. Finally, I decided I had no choice but to deal with it. The box couldn't stay in the garage anymore. I suited up. Rubber gloves, face mask, everything. I prepared myself for the worst. I grabbed a garbage bag and made my way to the box. What I found inside, however, was beyond anything I could have imagined. It wasn't a bunch of spoiled meat like I thought. Number it was my neighbor. Dead. He was there, in one piece, like he had been stuffed into the box. He was lifeless, his body contorted and still. He had been mailed to me somehow in that box. I couldn't believe it. I felt like the world was spinning around me. In a panic, I called the police. It didn't take long for them to bring me in for questioning. I wasn't surprised. I had a dead body in my garage, after all. It must have seemed like the most obvious thing. But when they questioned me, they realized that I wasn't involved. Then they showed me something that would haunt me forever. A video. It was from my neighbor's vlogging camera. The footage was chilling. My neighbor laughing, talking about how he was going to mail himself across state lines. He had packed himself into the box, brought food, water, and a few supplies, and closed himself in for the journey. He was trying to go viral, trying to become famous by mailing himself in a box. The footage showed him talking as the box moved, as he traveled in it. At first he was fine. Then something went wrong. The box tipped over, and that was the last of the video. His neck had broken in the fall. But there was one thing the police didn't show me. One thing I didn't tell them. As the box tumbled, I heard something. Something I recognized. The sound of my garage door. That's when I realized. He'd been in that box, shipped across town, and somehow ended up in my garage. His friend had dropped him off for the stunt, and I had been none the wiser. I had no idea that my neighbor had died right there, in the very box he had sent to me. Now I can't forget the sight of that body, or the sound of the door creaking open.